So I want to take the time today to welcome you guys to this Farkle for who we call Big Mac, who you all know as Ryan, your family member. Oh, you guys know. This is great.
That's right.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So
Big Mac.
I understand Big Mac's had a lot of names growing up, but we call him Big Mac, and he's a very, very important part of this team. I'm going to tell you throughout the day kind of what that means to us and what I hope that means to you guys as his family. This ceremony is called the Farkle, which is a really funny name for a very serious thing for us. It stands for friends and relatives, kin, loved ones, and everyone else. In other words, gathered here, you guys are the ones that are very important to Ryan in his life. So thank you guys for making the trip and being out here with us today. Before I go into Ryan's life and how we got to the point that he's at, I want to talk a little bit about what this team means to America and to the world. If you look at it, here's the jet that we fly behind us. That's the #1 airplane. We're going to fly that today. You've got Ryan's name right here on the cockpit, right at the heart of the aircraft. This airplane, I want you to look at it and I want you to think about something. If this airplane was built for recruiting for the United States Air Force, you would think it would be the Air Force colors, wouldn't you? Which would be blue and silver, like what we wear on our uniforms, what Ryan's got on right here. It's not. It's red, white, and blue. This jet was built, and this team was built in 1953 with a very important mission. It was to recruit, retain, and inspire, but it's not focused on the recruiting mission. It's focused on that inspiration mission. The team was built to connect the American public to its military, to remind everybody that sees us that we are your Air Force. It doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter how long you've been in this country. It doesn't matter how many generations you go back or if you just got here. We are your Air Force, and it's a very, very important role for all of us. This team is here to create a beacon of excellence in the name of service to something bigger than ourselves. Because if we get that right, we unite in divided times, we bring people together, we convince our youth to grow up thinking about service to something bigger than themselves, and we draw the very best people from around this planet to our shores so that they can too commit to that beacon of excellence in the name of service to something bigger than self. That's what this team represents. That's what Ryan represents. He's a part of this team and a very integral part of it. In fact, we'll get to this punchline later. But Ryan runs a shop that is only 2 people deep right now, and he's in charge of it. And it's an extremely important one. We're going to talk about how much responsibility he really has, but let's talk about how we got here. When you talk about somebody's life and the person that they grew up to be, you really have to start from the beginning. The formative years, age 3 to 14, when people become who they're going to be in this world. Now, Ryan's formative years were very, very formative.
Oh, don't we know?
I don't often hear stories like this one. It's moving in a lot of ways. You know, you go back to Ryan's youth, and the first thing that stands out to me is that both of you served in the Navy.
Yep.
And in fact, both of you were in the Navy Signal Corps.
Yep.
And both of you did a job that was very important. For those not familiar, the Signal Corps is what signals with light guns across ships and uses Morse code to communicate. And I understand that the position has technically been retired from the Navy, but I want you to know that we, the Thunderbirds, have carried that on. All right, I'm going to point out Thunderbird 9 standing right behind you. He's our doctor. He's our Signal Corps.
Oh,
You're
cool.
actually going to see him out on the shoreline today, using his light gun and his mirrors to communicate with me while I'm flying visually. And so that's a really important role for us, actually. So I have mad respect for what you guys did. Thank you both for your service. Thank you for conveying that element of service into Ryan, because you can't remove that from his decision to go in the Air Force with everything he was dealing with in high school. You know, I know how influential it is to have service members in the family. And then congratulations on your retirement, sir, from the post office. You continue to serve after that. So you have those 2 service members growing up, you know, raising this young man in his formative years. And I asked him, you know, Big Mac, what's like your first memory from Maryland, you know, growing up? What's your first memory? You know what he said? 9/11.
Oh yeah.
9/11. So that's pretty eye-opening for me. I was in my 20s when it happened. And, you know, people forget that 21 years ago, the impact of 9/11 on families, on Americans, was very, very much the same impact that COVID had, the pandemic had on this country just recently over the last couple of years. It was shattering. It made you question your institutions. It made you question whether you were safe or not. It shook things up. And, I know that when I look back at his upbringing in his very young years, what you two were dealing with, not just with 9/11, I'm just going to say it, with the loss of a child.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that was like. And I can't imagine how fast this young man had to grow up to deal with everything that was going on in the family. I know you guys separated, and I'm going to go with you first, man, because, you raised he and his sister Megan for their very early years, basically exclusively. Yeah. And there's a couple of really interesting stories that stood out to me when I think about this from the target backwards. How did he happen? And one of the memories that really stood out to me was you taking him into your backyard pool and teaching him how to dive through a hoop.
Yep.
Through a float.
I made him jump over me.
That's right. Teaching him how to start, it turns out, because he then went on to join Summer League Swimming and absolutely dominate.
Yeah, he still loves to swim.
I know. And I'll tell you, Ryan and I really connected over that when we discovered that. I was a swimmer growing up.
Oh, cool.
Throughout my whole life. And I'll tell you right now that I'm going to take your tube technique and use it for my little boys.
Yeah.
Because I cannot get them to start without flopping into the water. So I'm going to use that technique.
Also, another good thing is when they're swimming, tell them to pretend there's a shark right behind them.
I like it.
Yeah.
I'm going to use
Remember that?
So swimming's a special sport that you got him into. You started this. Swimming's very cathartic. When things are difficult, swimming is something you can just bury your face in the water and go and kind of leave it all behind you. And I can tell you that was, Ryan, I know that was important for you to be able to do that growing up. And then there's Megan. Ryan told me that there were times when he'd be babysitting Megan. And he told me a great story about how he, one day he wanted to ride his bike with his friends. It was what he was into. He had Megan with him. She was anchored at home. He wanted to ride that bike. And so he spent the entire day teaching Megan how to ride that bike. And as difficult as it was, he got her there. Yep. And they were able to ride together from that point forward.
Yeah, she used to just jump off the bike instead of hitting the brakes.
It's very moving to really process that, for a young man to have that kind of responsibility. It says a lot about how much you trusted him. And Ryan also talks about how you take him on a cruise. He remembers the cruise really well. He remembers you walking through DC, learning the monuments, learning why America is important.
He loved the Smithsonian.
Yes. So my sincere thanks for those formative years. I'll tell you, the story doesn't end there. Because when Ryan was 13, we can admit this now because you can see the results.
Yeah.
David Ryan was having some trouble in school. Started getting into some of the wrong crowds. I get it. Big responsibility for this kid. People deal with stuff in different ways. Sometimes it's swimming. Sometimes you start making the wrong friends. And so that's when he moved in with you. And he describes that era as a time of very, very sound advice. Not the kind of advice that's like, you are doing this and it's my way or the highway, but the kind that actually works. We were like, let me tell you the why behind everything that you're having to decide right now. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I have never seen this before, but to hear him talk about who he was involved with in his middle school to early high school years, and then the fact that because of your advice, he was able to slowly back away from that crowd on his own decision, and focus on his own life and his own forward way of thinking. That is very, very special. And that tells me so much about who you are as a person and the way you raised this kid. Thank you for that. You probably saved his life. And I say that because I think it's important for the family to understand this. Two of his good friends in high school that were originally a part of that crowd, two of them overdosed and died on heroin later on. Actually, not too long ago. I say that because the strength that it would take for somebody to go, these are my friends. My family's saying one thing, my friends are saying another thing. I'm going to tell you right now, you know it, most people go with the friends.
Yeah.
But in those formative years where he was deciding who he was going to be, you got through to him. You got through to him. It worked. He decided to commit to the Air Force instead. And, as he's now 18 years old and is deciding to go ahead and go forward with the U.S. Air Force, Thanks to you talking him out of the Navy, by the way.
Yeah, that was a surprise.
He goes on to the U.S. Air Force, and there's a bit of nostalgia. If you believe in a higher power, this will stand out to you. So, unfortunately, due to great tragedy, at the end of high school, Ryan and you all are going to lose Megan. She doesn't make it through her high school years. And at the funeral, Ryan gets his date.
Yeah.
For basic training.
That was so weird.
And that date is September 25th, which is the same day that Megan was born. And I'm sure that was a moving moment for you to know that you made the right choice.
I remember you told me.
I'm sure that was a moving moment for all of you to know.
I was like, wow.
Okay, you believe in a higher power, here it is. So off he goes to basic training. Now, despite having service members in the family, basic training is fairly shocking. Ryan wasn't shy about telling me that it was a huge wake-up call, and he'd stare at the ceiling at night and go, what did I just do? And how do I get out of this situation? Most of the people I've interviewed have actually told me how basic training... I told you to gather it in close, didn't I? That basic training was like, okay, whatever, I got through it. No, not Ryan. Ryan got there, and the way he got out of it was by becoming the honor graduate. He absolutely crushed it. Graduated top of his class, walked out the doors at honor grad, and into what he thought his career was going to be as a combat controller. So remember, when he signed up for the Air Force, he didn't sign up for just any job. He went in to be a combat controller. He wanted to do the special forces thing, and he thought he was going to air traffic control. But he got injured. And again, you can see the theme emerging here of extreme resiliency in this young man. So he's now dealt with the death of the family in recent years. He's dealt with an injury that took him out of his dream job. So now there he is deciding what he's going to do next. And instead of sitting idly in those critical 6 months waiting to see what the Air Force is going to do with him, he goes into the Green Rope program where he's now instructing at basic training. So now you've got an honor grad that's giving back, all while he's waiting for the Air Force to decide his fate.
I never knew
And fortunately, the Air Force decides to move him forward into the ARMS program. The program that's responsible for tracking every flight hour and every flight dollar that goes on in every Air Force unit across this nation. Do not for 1 second think that this is a small task. I'm going to give you some numbers in a second here, but I think the best way I can put it is like this. In his role of ensuring training is complete, flight hours are tracked, things are signed out appropriately, and that these Air Force fighters are tracked down to the second, you would ask yourself, who in this Air Force gets to tell Thunderbird 1 that he can't fly today because he hasn't done the right thing in the administrative world? Ryan McCormack. That's it. And so, as he goes on through tech school and does extraordinarily well, he gets assigned to his first official base in Arkansas, which is going to be very fortuitous. Because there was a young lady that was dog sitting in Arkansas around that time. But Ryan is gonna, he's gonna go to Arkansas as an airman first class, so just fresh out of tech school. And he initially starts on the C-130H, which is a big propeller plane. It doesn't look anything like this. And then he's gonna rapidly transition to the C-130J. He's going to get promoted early to senior airman, put on his next stripe, and then he's going to look for opportunities to go and truly serve. So instead of settling for the aircraft he's on at the home station in Arkansas, he volunteers to deploy for a jet tanker called the KC-135 deployment, which happens to be pushing downrange to Operation Inherent Resolve. Now, Operation Inherent Resolve, for those who are not familiar, was the campaign against ISIS, which is one you heard about in the news often, but didn't hear much of on the negative light. Do you know why? Because it worked. OAR actually worked very well, and it actually ended in success, so you don't hear the bad press about it. It's one of our very rare success stories. And Ryan was deployed down there voluntarily, mind you, working the largest tanker plant in history. To the tune of 160,000 flight hours per year over a deployment cycle for that aircraft. Those are staggering numbers. He then came back to Little Rock, where he transitioned back to the C-130, changed airplanes again, got promoted not once but twice on his first attempt, all the way to technical sergeant, and continued to thrive over the next several years running 160,000-hour flight programs until he got selected to be the single, not the Thunderbirds, wait for it, there's something even cooler before that. He got selected to be the single person to run the shop for the 29th Weapons Squadron. Now I'm going to describe that to you. You've all seen the movie Top Gun, right?
Yeah.
Okay. At the beginning of Top Gun, it says at the bottom, this school is called Weapons School, but the pilots call it Top Gun. The Air Force calls it Weapons School. All right, so Weapons School is the elite program in the United States Air Force for instruction and for building our next generation of pilots. Those guys. And crews at the absolute elite level. So the top 1% of instructors are selected for Weapons School to go back and learn to that nth level. And they picked Ryan McCormack to run their flying hour program, to run their operations from the ground. So he was the one Charlie, he was the arms troop for their weapons school for the C-130. He did so well that he got promoted again. And then he ended up going to the United States Air Force Thunderbirds because he happened to be at Nellis Air Force Base where the weapons school is headquartered, and do a tour of the Thunderbirds and decide, this is the organization that's meant for me. Now the Thunderbirds is a selectively manned unit, which means nobody accidentally ends up on this team. Which means Ryan would have been vetted extensively before he was asked to join the team. And I'll tell you, when you look at his background, it was not a hard decision. Promoted early or on his first attempt every single time, all the way through tech sergeant, because of his commitment to excellence, his commitment to detail, and his desire to do the right thing. And that's you guys. That's your values coming through in your son as he grows up. Having already grown up, having already seen pretty much everything. You know, his ability to meet adversity like a pandemic and move right through it, no problem. And you know, when I put all this together, I look at the fact that through all of this, you guys get together. You know, one of the very few success stories I hear from online dating. And, and I think my favorite part is that when you guys met, you had like 6 months left on a visa, right? So it was one of those situations where you're like, you know, Ryan having